Good morning, everyone. Before we move forward, I did want to spend a little time going in depth on these types of accounts we talked about the other day. I know it's been a couple days, I've been kind of busy, but I feel like sorry, I feel like the more we know about the types of accounts, the better we are generally. And for some of you that may not have the time or the money or the interest in doing something like getting a money magazine and teaching yourself, I figured before we move on, why not just go into a little bit more detail about all these different account types that we discussed the other day where you can save money for retirement. So I'm going to start with the work 401k because I feel like it's the most important. As you go back years and years ago, and I'm talking about generally early 1900s through most of the 80s, many companies had what was called a pension plan. And a pension plan was money that the company set back for its employees if they spent a certain number of years working there. And then when you retired, if you had met that criteria for the number of years, you would receive payouts from the company every year for the rest of your life. And a lot of times the pension was based on how much you earned, so that it kind of kept you at a lifestyle that you were accustomed to having when you were working. Meaning if you were a worker who earned $40,000 a year versus 80, the $80,000 a year earner would get more in pension money. But the problem with this was that the companies actually had to fund their pension accounts. And in the early 90s, when Toyota started ramping up and the Camry got popular and the Corolla got popular, Toyota was making way more money per car than Ford and General Motor because Toyota never ever had a pension plan, ever. The Japanese have never really done pensions. And when they talked about revenue per car, Ford and GM made less money per vehicle because they had this very large pension shortfall that they had to make up for. And this ended up being kind of bad for workers in the long run because a lot of these companies either cut down the pension plan payments. Good God, say that 3 times fast. They cut down the payments, or as was my grandfather's case with IBM, part of the pension was getting some subsidized health care, and they actually completely eliminated that. So he went from having health insurance paid for by IBM once he was retired to having none. And the term 401k comes from it's a subsection in the tax law, and it got popular in the 90s, and now almost nobody offers a pension anymore, and everybody offers a 401k, and the law allows you to have money withdrawn from your paycheck before it's taxed and put into that account for retirement. And the max amount of money, as we said the other day, is $19,000 a year. And I want to explain how this benefits you in a couple of ways. The first is it reduces your taxable income. Now, you don't get that full amount back every year. Let's say, for example, that you contributed $5,000 this year. You don't get a $5,000 tax refund. What it does is it takes the full amount of money you made for the year and reduces it by $5,000 and says your taxable amount is this smaller amount now. Then they're not allowed to add in that $5,000 to be taxed. So that helps you out week to week as you're moving along because your taxes are less. Just so you know, your health insurance also comes out pre-tax. So that helps. Then the biggest component was the company match, which is way cheaper for companies than a pension plan because it's not as big of a sum of money. It's generally limited. I told you the other day that you're talking like 100% of the first three, 100% of the first three plus 50% of the next two. It's a smaller amount of money that they're giving you to match. You're allowed to contribute over that, but they're not going to add any more to it. And then that money gets to just grow until you retire, and when you take it out, it's taxed. Now, there are some pitfalls to 401ks in that some companies don't put a whole lot of money in them, meaning, let's say your 401k is through Fidelity, you might not have a big range of fund options, okay? You might only have 10 or 15 mutual funds to pick from. I know when Kristen worked for OU Health Sciences Center, they had 20. But when you look at the overall stock market and how many mutual funds and index funds are out there, it's in the tens of thousands, and you've got a very limited number of choices to pick from. Furthermore, they might not be the cheapest ones on the market either. They might have higher expense ratios. However, with the tax break coupled with the company match, it makes the 401k your most powerful saving tool for retirement because it's taking it out right now and you don't miss it. Also, you're getting what we talked about, that dollar cost averaging. You're not trying to time the market and guess when it's up, when it's down. You're just plowing that money back every 2 weeks like clockwork all the time and never stopping. So it's a really good tool for retirement. And it is going to be the one that is probably your biggest. Now, a lot of companies have started making people have to opt out because a lot of people never opted in. They would sit through new hire orientation. They would get to this thing on the 401k, not know what the hell it was, and they would just not fill out the paperwork and not sign up. So now a lot of companies are opting you in for like 3%, I think is probably the average. But if your company didn't opt you in, I already talked to you that I'd like you to get to a point where you can go into your job at the end of April, hopefully with the spare money you found in your budget, and sign up for at least the company contribution. Companies will also have in there a provision where you can have it automatically increased every year by like 1%, 2%, you pick what amount. What I would suggest you do is if you've gotten together at the end of April a new budget for yourself and you're contributing the max to your company match, I would suggest that every year when you get a raise, you just increase your 401k by that amount. So let's say you're doing 6% now because your company will match half that. So that's going to give you a 3% match or an immediate 50% return on your money. If you get a 3% raise next year, I'd like to see you take that 6% to 9%. And the reason is you will still have more money in your check because, again, this is taken out pre-tax. So you won't be losing all of that 3% raise. You'll just be losing a small amount of it. And furthermore, you should have been living inside this new budget we're creating at the end of April. So you should not need that extra money right now. Now, unless you're just drowning in credit card debt, but I'm talking about in very generalized terms. And if you need some advice or some help deciding what to do, let me know. But I also want to make sure you all understand what happens when you take money out of your 401k. So let's say you switch jobs. What too many American workers do is they withdraw that money from their 401k. And then you are assessed a 30% penalty. They do a 20% capital gains tax and then a 10% early withdrawal penalty, okay? So if you had amassed $10,000 in your 401k and you went to a new company and you cashed that out, you would immediately lose $3,000 to taxes and fees, okay? So you never want to do that. You always want to roll it over to the next company or into like a rollover IRA. Those are the two places you can roll it, and that is it. There's other crazy stuff we could get into. We're not. Those are your two choices. Roll it to the new job or roll it into an rollover IRA somewhere else. Also, with many 401k plans, they will allow you to do what's called a loan from your 401k. And I had somebody call me the other day asking about it. And there are times that taking a loan out of your 401k is not bad, but you need to be savvy about when you do it. Right now, I told you all what a bull market is. We are in the longest running one in U.S. history. I would tell you right now, if you really needed something, taking a loan out of it right now while the market is extremely high before it potentially falls might not be a bad idea. The other thing about a loan is they're going to give you a interest rate, and it's dirt cheap, like 3-4%. But that interest rate they're charging you for the loan, you're paying back to yourself. So what I want you to imagine is we're at a market high now, and we are obviously at some point going to have to come down. You're pulling that money out up here as a loan, and you're paying yourself back 3%, which means you're gaining 3%. And then the rest of your 401k is losing some value over time because the market falls. That's not a big deal. It's going to happen. But there are some financial planners who do say that taking a loan out of your 401k at a market high, like right now, isn't always the worst idea. It's just, what are you taking that loan out for? If it's to make a down payment and go buy a new car you don't need, it's a bad idea. If it's being used to retire some very expensive credit card debt, then that would be a good idea. So right now, if by a miracle you had some 401k money and you wanted to borrow it to pay off debt right now, it would not be technically a bad idea. But there is a catch to this. Let's say that you borrow some money out of your 401k and they give you a certain option on how many years you want to pay it back, and you take the 5-year option. They're going to tell you how much is going to come out of your paycheck each month on top of your 401k that you're already contributing to pay that loan back. And let's say you do the 5-year option and in 3 years you switch companies. You have to either pay back the remaining 2 years immediately in full cash, or they count that as a withdrawal and they will hit you on your taxes at a 30% hit to that remaining amount of the loan. So I tell people, only when the market is up and only when you have no plans and your job is pretty secure should you ever take a loan out, and only do it to satisfy something that's got a very, very, very high interest rate, pretty much credit card debt, and that would be it. So that's kind of a deeper dive onto 401ks. A couple of people have reached out to me and asked me to help them by looking at their options, and I don't mind to do that at all. You just need to make sure that you have your account set up and can log in so I can see what the options are. But if you all are savvy enough to read the options you have, I think I mentioned the other day, 60% S&P 500 fund, 20% overseas fund, 20% small cap stock fund. If you're an older person and you're in your 50s or 60s, then I would put 15% into a bond fund and trim that 15 off the 60% regarding the S&P 500 and do 45. But those are just strategies for based on your age. But that's kind of a deeper look into the 401k, guys, why it's beneficial, how it helps you. Trust me, it is your main saving vehicle for retirement. You can contribute the most to it. The Roth, which is my second favorite, you can only do $6,000. And whenever financial planners are calculating how much you save every month, you're allowed to count the company match in that. So if you put back 6% and your company matches 3%, you're already at 9%. So if the goal is to get to 20%, that 3% there that they gave you is already free. And then if you're increasing it by the amount of your raise every year, you're going to much quicker get towards a 20% savings rate than you would if you kept that money for yourself out of your raise. Once again, the new version of us has supposedly made a budget. We're supposedly living within that budget. We've supposedly trimmed fat out of our lives. So if you get a raise in the next year or so, then what I'm assuming is that you have begun spending less today than you already were yesterday, and then this extra money you don't need in terms of it covering your day-to-day living expenses, because you should be living within your means right now or busting your ass to get there. So that's a deeper dive on the 401k. That took about 14 minutes, so not terrible. We'll talk about the IRAs tomorrow, and then we'll begin moving on with more investing topics. Gosh, it's almost the end of the week, probably this weekend or early next week. But if you all need me for anything, hit me up, and otherwise, have a great day.